Hi, this is Connie Haxby, licensed clinical social worker, and today I wanted to talk about something called unearned guilt. And unearned guilt is basically guilt that doesn't belong to us, and it's something that we need to look at if we fall into this category of people who tend to feel guilty about things that we really don't need to feel guilty about. Before we get into unearned guilt, however, I just wanted to talk about guilt in general. A lot of us see guilt as sort of what we call a bad emotion or an unhealthy emotion. And for me personally, I just don't believe that. I think that what happens is if we are someone who values honesty and integrity and truthfulness, then when we lie, cheat, or steal, guilt comes on. And that kind of guilt is something that is needed because it lets us know, hey, I just violated my own set of moral codes and values, and I don't want to do that again. So let me try to do better in the future. So having that guilt is not necessarily a bad thing. When we talk about unearned guilt, however, what we're talking about is feeling guilty for things that we shouldn't feel guilty about. So for instance, feeling guilty about someone else's behavior. So if I have a friend who is constantly late to outings, I don't need to apologize to the host for that person being late to that party or that outing, because that isn't on me, that's on someone else, and that's not something that I should feel guilty about. Inappropriate behavior for, maybe my mate. If we're out somewhere and my mate acts in such a way that is inappropriate towards other people, I don't need to feel guilty for that. That doesn't apply to me. That's not something that I have done, so I don't want to take that on. So that's one example of unearned guilt. Another example of unearned guilt is this idea that I need to make other people happy. So we talked about boundaries in one of my videos, I think it was last week. And, saying no, setting a boundary, making sure that I'm taking care of myself and being assertive. I need to make sure that I do those things, and I don't need to put other people's needs ahead of mine. I'm not responsible for other people's happiness. I can't make other people happy. And when I don't do that, that's something that I don't need to feel guilty about, because we can't make other people happy anyway. So that's something that you need to, maybe explore if you're feeling some of that unearned guilt around other people. Another couple of things that we need to look at with unearned guilt are making sure that our standards for ourselves are reasonable. So, feeling guilty if I don't excel on something that I tend to be passionate about. So whether it's grades or work performance or a foot race that I'm doing, or archery, or this idea of what kind of friend I should be. Make sure that you have reasonable standards for yourself, because you don't want to put too much pressure and then have this unearned guilt because of what you think that you should be or what that should look like. And then lastly, one of the things that I hear from honestly a lot of my Christian folks are these ideas that I feel guilty about thoughts that I have, or I feel guilty about images that I have in my head. That is absolutely another example of something that can evoke unearned guilt, but that doesn't have to feel guilty for. We all have thoughts that are maybe a little bit skewed or a little bit jacked up. We can't help sometimes these thoughts that come into our head, and that's not something that we should feel guilty about. Now, again, if you are going against your own moral code and moral values by acting out some of those thoughts that don't apply to the kind of person that you want to be, then yeah, by all means, that might be something that could evoke some guilt. But just thoughts alone and images that pop into our head alone, we can't help that stuff, and it's not something that we should feel guilty about. So make sure that you're checking yourself when you have this guilt that pops up. Make sure that it's something that you quote unquote should feel guilty about, again, if it's something that goes against your moral code. But if it's not, and it falls into the category of these things that I've listed here, give yourself a break, because we have too much pressure in our life already to be putting on guilt that we don't need to apply to ourselves. So keep that in mind the next time that you have this feeling of guilt that comes on. Ask yourself, is this something that I really need to feel guilt about? Is this guilt, is it something that belongs to me? And if it doesn't, try to learn to let it go. Until next week, have a great day.